Hello, one and all, Mickey here. So, I've decided to make another video about how to set up custom missions, this time in XCOM 2, as well as how to use the tactical quick launch menu, add enemies, add friendlies, and a bunch of other stuff that you might find useful. First thing you need to do is activate the console, and you can do that by going to your Steam Games library, right-clicking on XCOM 2, go to Properties, set Launch Options, and the one you want to activate the console is -allow console. Another handy one might also be no startup movies, so you don't have to watch the developers' logos slide onto the screen one by one before you can get to the menu, but the rest are for debugging, as you can see. Click OK, close the menu, and load up the game. Now, you can open up the minimize console by pressing the / key on the bottom left of the keyboard, or you can open up the expanded console by pressing the apostrophe key to the left of the enter button. These buttons may vary depending on what keyboard you're using and its language setup, but typically one of those two keys will do. And now the command to open up the tactical quick launch menu. Open up the console and type in open space tactical quick launch. And this will bring you to the tactical menu where you can set up your own custom missions and maps. As the instructions say on the left, first thing you're going to want to do is set up your map's parameters. You can use a bunch of defaults on the left, which frankly I don't know how reliable they are because I haven't used them, or you can set them up individually, which is what I'd recommend. Starting with the plot type, which is basically what kind of buildings you can find in that environment. All of these are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm going to go for small town. Bear in mind though, when you set these up, you can only set up objectives that are relevant to that plot type. For example, you won't be able to set up a terror mission, retaliation mission, in a city centre, at least in my experience. Then you can choose the biome type, which is essentially the environment. Let's go for temperate. Mission type, this will be the objective that you're going to set on the mission. As you can see, I chose small town, so retaliation isn't available here. Typically when you choose the plot type, the missions available will be specific to that kind of plot type. And in general, you're going to want to choose from anything above defeat human opponent, which is essentially like multiplayer. That and anything below it is kind of untested, shall we say. The ones above are more the mission types you find in the actual game. So let's go with protect the device. Quest items going to be irrelevant for this mission type because I'm not hacking anything to get any kind of intel, so it doesn't make any difference. And frankly, for one-off missions, it wouldn't make any difference anyway. Layer type is blank, don't know what it does. Force level is how high level in tech the enemies will appear as. So 1 is at the start of the game, 20 is at the end of the game, and everything between is everything in between. So pick what you fancy. I'm going to go for 1, make it nice and simple. Alert level, honestly, I couldn't work out what it was. I'd assume it's their radius for detection when you're in concealment, but it doesn't appear to be the case, so I just leave it at 1. Environment lighting is again pretty self-explanatory and is limited by the plot type and the environment that you've selected. So let's go for a sunrise. Civilians being pro-Advent or pro-XCOM, this is just how civilian acts when you walk towards them. If they're pro-Advent and you walk towards them, they're going to run away. If they're pro-XCOM and you walk towards them, they will just simply stroll off like they don't care. But I do believe both will break concealment. The squad, this is where you can pick the number of soldiers that you want to spawn in with. Again, anything lower down the list I wouldn't recommend using, it will probably bug out and crash the game. So let's go something simple like 4 soldiers. Difficulty, self-explanatory, as it is in the normal campaign. And to participate if possible, I have no idea, I just leave it as it is and it works fine. Now, something that I have to mention about using this menu, if you haven't noticed it already, it crashes incredibly often. I will point out when, for me, it crashes almost guaranteed, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes. But the good news is, whatever you choose in the map data gets saved when you click accept, so if the game crashes and you come back here, click on it, and everything will be as you left it. So, choose squad. Now, I made a cut here so you didn't have to see the wait time, but usually it can take a minute or 2 to load this menu. And on top of that, this menu can also be extremely temperamental. For example, choosing a soldier from the character pool almost guarantees that the game will crash, for me at least. It doesn't appear to be anything to do with mods. I can pick soldiers from the character pool that came with the game, using completely vanilla assets, and the game will still crash when I try to load it up. So I'm going to leave that as no selection. Everything else here is pretty explanatory. Class, rank, primary weapon, secondary weapon, armor type, and the 2 utility items that they could have, as well as what the unit itself actually is. You can add or remove units by simply clicking these buttons, but in general I try not to mess about with this too much. And if I want to add alien units or advent units, I would simply use the console when I get in, because as I said, this menu can be a bit temperamental, and if you mess about with it too much when you try to load up the map, the game will just crash. So I'm going to leave it like this, save and exit, and then generate the map. Okay, I fast forwarded that, but again, depending on your PC specs, it can take between a minute or two for the map to load. But this is essentially what the map has generated given the parameters that you have added. If you've got a gamepad plugged in, you can use an analog stick to move the camera around. I don't, so I can't. As far as I'm aware, there is no other way to move the camera around without a gamepad plugged in. But frankly, I can see pretty clearly what the plots are, and on the right hand side you can see which area is a single individual plot. Now this is where the game can get a bit buggy, and for me almost guarantee for it to crash. If you're really not happy with a plot, you can select it, and then choose a different plot to replace the one that's already there. So for example, this giant plot here is this huge church. If I want to replace it, I could click on it and choose a different plot to go in that location. But fair warning, every time I've done this, it would load up, the terrain wouldn't match, and then when I click the start battle button, the game will just crash. So in my opinion, if you're not happy with what plots the game has loaded up, simply clear the map and generate it again, which to be honest can also crash the game. So worst case scenario, you might have to load the game up and generate a new map with new plots that you're happy with. I'm aware this isn't exactly an expert guide on how to use this, but as I said, this menu is incredibly temperamental. To demonstrate, let's see if I can clear the map and generate a new one. And using the same parameters, generate a new map. And there you go, it worked. Which frankly is a shock to me. I thought the game would crash and I have to load it back up. But there you go. Let's say I wasn't happy with the map as it was before. Simply cleared the map, generated it again using the same parameters, and for argument's sake, let's assume that I'm happy with what the game has given me. So, start battle. As with everything here, it can take a minute or two for the map to load, so give it time. But here are the 4 soldiers that I'd selected. I realised they spawned on top of the objective itself. This might actually have something to do with the fact that I've got my game set up to be able to spawn in 10 soldiers at a time. But worst case scenario, you can just teleport them to wherever you want them to be before you actually choose to move. Now the first command you want to find incredibly handy is, open up the console, ToggleFOW. This will reveal the whole map, but it won't reveal any enemies or civilians that your soldiers don't have line of sight on. So be aware, even though it looks like this low ground is clear, I could just run to this tree and trigger. So let's make this a little bit more fair and move my soldiers away. And you can do that with the console command ToggleUnlimitedActions, or abbreviated TTC. Now, as a general rule of thumb, when I'm setting up maps like this, once I've loaded in, generally before I do this would be a better idea, I would actually save the map itself. Because although this time it does appear that it's auto-saved, it doesn't necessarily always auto-save. So you could load up the map, actually be happy with it, screw up something like reveal the squad when you're trying to spawn in a unit, and you'll have nothing to load back to, and you'll have to generate the map again. So generally a good idea, save the map as soon as you've loaded up. And this way, if you screw up, you can just load back to this save point, and then carry on adding and removing whatever units you want. And speaking of which, adding and removing units. The command for that on the console is drop unit space whatever the unit name is. In the description of this video, I will have the console name of every unit in the game, so you won't have to look them up in the ini files. But for example, let's say I want a Viper. So drop unit Viper, enter. Now by default, they will spawn in as friendly, which means they're completely under your control. And of course, my acid spit actually revealed us all. But hey, no problem, that's fine. If you want to spawn in enemy units, exactly the same. Drop unit, space, then the unit name, then space, and then 1. 1 will set the unit onto the enemy's side. The default being 0, that being the player's side. And you can add as many as you want to the map. Bear in mind, if they're out of line of sight of your soldiers, you're not going to be able to see the unit that you just spawned in. For example, I spawned in a Viper here, you're not going to be able to see it. And if you're not happy with the location of the units you spawned in, another handy console command is SwapTeamsOnNearestUnitToCursor. Now the enemy Viper that I spawned in is friendly, which means I can then teleport her to wherever I want. Say I want it to be a sniper up here, TTC, and now she's up on the high ground. Bear in mind, as soon as the game starts, all the units that you add via the console will be active, so they're quite likely going to move. But that's how you move enemy units around, with the command SwapTeamsOnNearestUnitToCursor, and then selecting them and then teleporting them with TTC. Don't forget to switch their side back to the enemy once you're done. Then you'll lose vision because you have no friendly units in range to be able to see that enemy unit. Something very important to mention when you're adding units into the game. If you add a unit, let's say Advent Captain level 1, and you accidentally spawn him as friendly, switching his side means that although the game will then control that unit, if you kill all the other enemies on the map and this unit's remaining because it's spawned in as friendly, the game will end without you having to kill it. Bear that in mind when you're spawning in units. Make sure that they spawn in as the team that you want them to be. Only switch their sides for the sake of manipulating them. And that also applies when you're spawning in friendlies. If I spawned in an enemy Advent soldier, then switched his side, then lost my XCOM soldiers, the game will end because I'm using a soldier that was initially spawned in as an enemy. And another useful command is KillClosestUnitToCursor. This will apply to friendly or enemy, so make sure you're pointing in the right place. Enter, and although it would look like the soldier is still standing, they are actually dead. To make their corpse ragdoll, save the game, load it up, give me map vision again, game. And there is the soldier that we spawned in and then killed via the command. He does then ragdoll. Although, funnily enough, his weapon seemingly refuses to. But hey, close enough! So guys, that is basically it. If I've forgotten anything, I'll write an annotation on the screen now with useful console commands and a short description of what they do. In the description below will be a list of all the units you can spawn in via the drop unit command. And the enemies that you've spawned in on the map via the console start active, and they'll move around the map looking to engage you. As you saw there, the units that spawned into the map via the tech level that you chose start inactive, so when you get into range of them, they will trigger and scamper. So guys, that is basically everything. You can set up pretty much any kind of map you want with whatever units you want. Write in the comments below with any questions and I will do my best to answer them. As I mentioned, I am not an expert at this, and many aspects of creating this map and messing about with it crashes the game for me, and it's quite possible I'm doing something wrong, but at least you'll now know the basics and you can essentially set up custom missions with pretty much whatever parameters are already existing in the game. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Write your questions in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Alright then, Jack. Okay, don't let me down. Excellent. Lead down in a second, take it. Oh my god, you can't! Oh, so you guys are going to move. Very nice CCS. And I threw same thing. Close range. Quite a kill. These guys. Yes. Oh god. Once you get down to the avatar, I can. And he is in fact funny story. When did my try? Staring at me for about 10 seconds, and then he got CCS. Oh no! Oh my god! Okay. Oh, I guess these guys are vampires. I forgot to stay down. Siren is bigger in XCOM 1. Fair amount less damage. More than enough to kill him. Back. You have no ammo. No, you have no. Oh no, goodbye.